The Secrets of Doctor Who is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, episode 248.
One day, I shall come back.
That's it. I've been renewed.
Is when a Time Lord's body wears out, he regenerates.
I'm a Time Lord. I'm not a human being. I walk in eternity.
Braveheart.
Change, my dear, and it seems on a moment too soon.
Unlimited rice pudding.
Physician healers.
Wearing a bit thin.
Fantastic.
I am Scottish. I can complain about things.
Ta-da! Ooh. Should be fine.
Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, where we discuss everything about the hit BBC series, Doctor Who. And today we're discussing the 11th Doctor story, The Bells of St. John. And joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Aiken. Hi, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
And Father Cory Stika. Hi, Father Cory.
How's it going, Dom?
Very well, thank you. Folks, stick around to the end. We're going to have some of your listener feedback on previous episodes of The Secrets of Doctor Who, so you'll want to stick around for that. We also want to encourage you to go to Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast from and write a review of The Secrets of Doctor Who. Give us a nice 5-star review. That helps us a lot. And if you share the podcast with your friends, let them know it's here and help us grow our community. And finally, I want to recommend another show that's on the StarQuest Network called The Secrets of Technology, which Father Cory and I do with a great list of other folks who join us and talk about technology from a particularly Catholic perspective. You want to check that out wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/technology. But today we're talking about this Doctor Who story, The Bells of St. John. And Jimmy, could you give us a quick recap of this episode?
Early 21st century attractive London girl, like we haven't heard that before, Clara Oswald, knows nothing about the internet and is having trouble connecting, so she calls a helpline at a number given to her by a mysterious lady in a shop. The helpline is direct to the TARDIS, which is in the year 1207, where the Doctor is moping and trying to figure out the mystery of Clara, who he's seen die twice before. Responding to her phone call, he jumps back to the 21st century, only to find that Clara isn't keen to see him as he's acting like a madman. Soon, her mind is sucked out of her body and uploaded into a data cloud, but he uses his computer skills to get her downloaded again. This leads to him uncovering a plot by a nameless organization that is being employed by the Great Intelligence to upload human minds so that the intelligence can feast on them or enjoy them in some unspecified way. The organization can also hack living people's minds and adjust them. Central to its plan are creepy walking robotic Wi-Fi servers that can look like anybody. Using new computer skills Clara got while being uploaded, she tracks the organization to its headquarters but gets uploaded again. This time, Clara is fully integrated into the data cloud, meaning she can't be individually downloaded again. The Doctor then uploads and fully integrates the head of the nameless organization, so the only way to get her out of the cloud is to download everybody back into their bodies, if they still have one, including Clara. This happens so Clara is saved. Yay! UNIT bursts in to capture the nameless organization, but the Great Intelligence has all of the organization's employees do a factory reset on themselves, so they lose all memory of working for him. The Doctor then invites Clara to become a companion, determined to discover the mystery of who she is and why he's met her before, only to see her die twice. The end.
The end.
That was so elite about the computer skills.
The skills with a Z. That's definitely a Z. So, so this is the BBC was adamant that this was not a new season, and it's listed as a continuation of season 7, the series 7.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, going to I read that they went to the extreme of filing a cease and desist order against somebody who called it a new series. So they're very adamant this is the second half of the series, season 7. But it's been 3 months.
It matters.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter. But it was 3 months since the Christmas special, and then that in 5 months since Angels Take Manhattan, and and we have a new Doctor outfit. We have a new TARDIS control room. I mean, everything says this is a reset in a sense. This is apart from a new Doctor, a new incarnation. This is pretty much a big reset for the show.
Well, when you would buy the DVDs, you would have season 7 part 1, season 7 part 2. They actually, until they released them as a complete package, could buy them as separate parts. So it was all in, but in name, a new season.
Right, exactly. So, and this, as you mentioned, Jimmy, this has the Great Intelligence. It has Richard Grant showing up as the Great Intelligence. He was in The Snowmen. And it's sort of a sequel to The Snowmen. And I think it implies that the Great Intelligence is now this new big baddie that we're going to be seeing again and again. Except
once.
When do we see the Great Intelligence after this?
Name of the Doctor.
Oh, right. That's right.
He's at the beginning and end of this second half of a season.
Right. Yeah. That's right. And now that we've watched the Yeti episode with the second Doctor, the Abominable Snowmen,
the first of the two.
Yes. That was the Doctor's technically now second encounter and most recent prior to this episode encounter, right?
No, most recent occurs in the 1960s in the London Underground.
That's right. You mentioned that before. I haven't seen that one yet. So it's
coming soon, but we're still got a little ways to go before we get to that one.
Okay. So I guess they were setting up the Great Intelligence to be
the big baddie that's going to corrupt his timeline so Clara can jump into it and fix it.
Okay. All right. That's what that was. Okay. So and then once that's done, we're done with the Great Intelligence apparently. Unless they bring it back, because they can always do that. That's what they do. So the other thing that I wanted to mention as we start was you mentioned that Clara gets the Doctor's number from a woman in the shop who says he's the best helpline available, best helpline in the universe. And we'll eventually find out long in the future. This was a long setup.
Yeah.
That it's Missy.
Yeah.
We find out at the season finale of season 8 that Missy's the one who gave her the number here. That was in Death in Heaven. So very interesting.
And I can just imagine Missy playing a harried shop worker, with Clara, knowing nothing about the internet there, going, oh yeah, call this number. It's the best helpline there is. And
Missy's the best. So, and as you said, Clara is completely clueless as we begin the episode about anything having to do with computers, the internet. She's living with a family as a sort of unpaid
friend of the family caretaker for the kids.
Right. Because the mom died.
The mom died, yeah.
Yeah. And she's talking to one of the girls, like, when you get off the internet, let me know. I need to get on. And the girl's like, that's not how Wi-Fi works. Which,
Hey,
that is how old telephone lines worked.
That's right.
I was gonna say, if you remember old dial-up, that's exactly how it worked.
Ugh. Yeah, I remember that. Like, I'm on the computer. Don't pick up the phone. Oh no, you've ruined my AOL session. So, this episode felt very 2013 in a sense of the way the technology took center stage in this.
Wi-Fi was for most people a very new technology at this point. And the computers and everything, very much looked like 2013 computers, and very dated.
Right.
Oh, and that was when there was a fad for netbooks.
Yes.
And so Clara has a netbook, and a netbook, for people who may not be aware, is a kind of small, stripped down laptop.
Yep.
That is designed to connect to the internet and not do much else. So very low power machines. And there's no way they could take the typing speed that we see the Doctor and Clara doing on them.
No.
TV hackers, like, it is just the way you see people type. It always cracks me up watching them, like they're just smashing keys. Like, it's just mashing keys. It's so funny.
And having done programming and network security, that's not what it looks like. That's absolutely nothing what it looks like. There's
is
no
not
such
how
thing
the
as a
Force
code
works.
fight. People aren't literally fighting with each other on keyboards back and forth. It just doesn't work that way. Sorry.
Yeah. If you want to see a TV show that really understands computers and does it really well, you watch Mr. Robot, which is now available on Netflix, by the way. It's from the computer science perspective, it's awesome.
Yeah. Well, I know on Mr. Robot, they make the effort to have all the hacking be actually possible.
Right.
I still think they dramatize it, though. It's like they have people typing faster and not making it the number of mistakes they'd really make while typing.
Yeah, that's true. So the title...
By the way, notice that this is Stephen Moffat doing a common Stephen Moffat thing in this episode in terms of finding the monster, which is taking something from normal life and trying to make it scary.
Right.
So that explains the Weeping Angels. It explains the Hush episode. Here we're making Wi-Fi scary. We've had, this is a regular thing these days. Find some aspect of modern life and then make it scary.
Yeah, I mean, that whole opening sequence, that teaser of the guy, the voiceover warning of danger and showing images of people using their computers in different places and then clicking. People, this is a real warning. Don't click on unknown Wi-Fi hotspots.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Yeah, especially in a language you don't understand.
Yeah, you're not going to get uploaded into the internet, but you could probably get your system hacked or a virus or something. So don't do that. But and if it's in Aurebesh, don't do that either. The Aurebesh is the alphabet from Star Wars, which it looked a lot like. But in any case, it was an interesting opening sequence where it is that the banal, the normal, becomes very sinister very quickly. If you click on it, you will die within 24 hours. So it was. I thought that was kind of
a lot
interesting.
it was kind of like The Ring in that respect.
Yes, if you watch this video, you will die in 24 hours. It's very sinister.
If you want to go old school, like The King in Yellow.
Oh yes, which is a book that was said to make you insane.
It is a real book of short stories that all feature a play called The King in Yellow that we get little snippets of. But if you read the complete King in Yellow, which does not exist, it curses you in some way, and some horrible thing will happen to you if you've actually read The King in Yellow.
I read a book, an alt history book by Stephen Sterling that incorporated that into the story and made it real in a way. It was fascinating. It was kind of really creepy too.
I prefer the Monty Python, the joke that the killer joke. There was this skit in Monty Python where there was a joke that was so funny you would die after reading it. You would die laughing. And so they weaponized it during World War II. Where they broadcast it to the Germans, and each soldier would have a little bit of the joke, and they would broadcast the whole joke, but none of them had the whole joke.
Hell gesput. Yeah.
So, that's good. So
one scientist heard 2 syllables of the joke and spent several weeks in hospital.
Monty Python.
Humor is an emergent property, though.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about the title of the episode, The Bells of St. John, because it has a couple of meanings.
Sure.
So a monk shows up at the monastery where the doctor is hiding out in 1207 in Cumbria, saying the bells of St. John are ringing. And what it turns out that the phone in the police box, that is the TARDIS, there's a phone door on the front that is, the doctor says is not supposed to work, but apparently does. And there's the sign on the front of the police box, of this version of the police box anyways, of the TARDIS, that says St. John Ambulance. So these are the bells of St. John, the parent. But there's also a nursery rhyme called Oranges and Lemons, which I used to recite to my kids. Oranges and lemons say the bells of St. Clemens. Pokers and tongs say the bells of St. John's.
Oh, I haven't heard. Okay, so that version of Oranges and Lemons I'm not familiar with.
Yeah.
There's another version where it's oranges and lemons say the bells of St. Clemens. You owe me 5 farthings say the bells of St. Martin's.
Right.
And then it continues on, but St. John is not mentioned.
There are a couple versions, and one of the
Mhm.
versions includes the bells of St. John. So
Well, since it's a folk rhyme,
yeah,
versions are to be expected, I guess.
right. And they end with the alternate version ends with, "Here comes a candle to light you to bed, and here comes a chopper to chop off your head," because that's how Victorian nursery rhymes go.
Yeah.
They're very. My kids actually were talking about that last night. Nursery rhymes. They're very creepy.
And by chopper, they mean axe.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
It's theorized it was part of a kid's game where the arms, like they hold hands, and as the kids process through the last one through, the chopper chops them. They lower their arms and they trap them in it. But anyway, that would have been familiar to a British audience, especially the oranges and lemons. So as soon as I heard the bells of St. John, I start reciting it in my head, like the bells of the oranges and lemons. So it would have been familiar in that case as well. So I just thought that was an interesting little connection.
Yeah.
And oranges and lemons does come up in Doctor Who in a couple places, but probably not related to this.
It comes up other places too. It's in 1984 by George Orwell, for example.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
The references to the bells of St. Clemens, the bells of St. John's, the bells of St. Martin's. These are all churches in the London area.
Yeah,
and so they would be incorporated into nursery rhymes in the area.
That's right. Right. Yeah, people have gone through and they've tried to identify which particular church would have fit which St. John's and which St. Clemens and that sort of stuff. One thing about this story is it has a very close resonance to the 10th Doctor story, Idiot's Lantern, which is about people being trapped into the new technology of the time, being sucked up into it by an alien intelligence, an alien disembodied intelligence that wants to feed
That was
off them.
the TV lady, feed me.
Right, and Magpie Electronics, which I thought they missed a beat when they didn't have the organization be called Magpie. I just
This also has a striking similarity to the 12th Doctor story arc, where Missy is uploading people into a simulated cloud-based afterlife.
Yeah,
Right.
they kept going to this idea, like TV's, like you said, TV is a ubiquitous, everyday occurrence, and making it sinister and that sort of stuff. And I think people feel like technology is ubiquitous enough, but other enough for most people that it's sort of, I'm not sure how it works, so it makes me worry about it, even though it's all around me here.
Well, and
that
it
sort of thing.
also plays into the concept of TV sucking you in. We talk about, I was so sucked in by that show, I had to keep binge watching it, or I'm so sucked. I had such a time suck. The internet's such a time suck for me. That's constantly just it's that same kind of mindset of you get so focused on it that you kind of lose sense of what's around you. Well, in the case of this story, you literally do lose. You get sucked into it and lose sense of what's around you. You don't know where you are because you're trapped.
Right. Even back to Tron in the early 80s, which was about a guy who plays video games and gets sucked into a computer world, that sort of thing. This has been a constant trope in entertainment ever since then, that they kept going back to. So it's interesting that this is so similar to that story that they went back to it.
There are even dramaturgical parallels where people get sucked into a play.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Like in The Real Inspector Hound.
Right. So one of the things I was thinking about this episode is I like it, but I felt like they needed to spend so much time working the relationship between Clara and the Doctor that they didn't spend enough time on the whole danger plot bad guy situation, or as much time as I thought it could have used. What do you all think?
Well, the fact we didn't get a name for the organization itself is a sign that they were going light on what we know about this group. And it was, fundamentally, this episode introduces the Doctor to Clara as a companion, so we need the two of them spending a lot of time together and bonding and having experiences and being under threat, and we get all of that. But then we have very little idea what this organization is actually doing. We know it's uploading minds for the Great Intelligence, and he needs them for reasons, but we don't know what those reasons are, or who these people are, or how they are keeping all of this quiet. when people suddenly keel over after connecting to their Wi-Fi network.
They kind of hint at it at the end what it's doing, and basically I can't remember the way it phrased it, but basically it's learning off of these people. It's feeding off of their knowledge, their experiences, and everything, and so it's learning off them. But it's just like one line that was just kind of a quick hint of where I've grown enough from these people anyway. Right at the end before he has the head of this organization do her factory reset. But basically, I've gotten what I've needed out of this. We're good now. We're done now.
Right. I feasted on many minds. I have grown, but now it's time for you to reduce, he says to Miss Kismet.
Yeah.
So it was just that one line just kind of hints at the whole purpose of it was for the great intelligence to expand its intelligence.
Right.
Yeah. There's another hint at feeding involved earlier on when she says that he needs free range human minds.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. It makes it sound like humans, like cattle, that sort of thing.
Well, they actually use that analogy.
Yeah. Yep. So a couple of interesting little tidbits. We find out that the family that Clara is living with is called the Maitlands. Their Wi-Fi password is RYCBAR123, which stands for Run You Clever Boy and Remember, which the doctor hears her say and that's what Oswald said to him. And the 123, she's the third Clara that he's encountered. Yeah. When she's sucked into the cloud, she's downloaded into the cloud or uploaded, whichever word they choose at the moment. Yeah.
Yep.
The people ask, "Where am I?" Which is the question that Oswald asks when she realizes she's a Dalek in Asylum of the Daleks.
Mm-hmm.
And she also chooses Oswald as a username when she's logging into something.
Which is a portmanteau of Oswald for the win.
Right.
Yep.
And all these different things, the doctor keeps, like, she says these things, and the doctor kind of stops him in his tracks because he recognizes all of these connections, and he's trying to figure out what's going on here with this really strange girl. So they're laying all these seeds for us to pick up later on when she becomes the Impossible Girl traveling through his time. Another little tidbit is that Clara has a book that she gets called Summer Falls by Amelia Williams, which is Amy Pond, right?
That's right.
So this is a children's book written by Amy Pond.
Yeah. So that I like that. That was
and you can buy this book.
Oh, they created a book after the fact? Oh.
Well, or in conjunction with, or something like that. And basically, if I understand correctly, it's like 3 novellas, one of which is Summer Falls. But that's the cover story, and it's got it's got the same cover that we see in the show.
Okay.
Well, and there's a great line there where the daughter's reading this and says, "Well, what chapter are you on?" Chapter 10. Oh, chapter 11. You'll love it. And of course, reference.
You'll
to
cry
11.
your eyes out.
You'll cry your eyes out. That's right.
Chapter 11's the best. 11's the best, she says. Yeah. Referring a subtle reference to the 11th Doctor.
Yep.
It is interesting that in this story that the Doctor is finally able to save a Clara. I mean, that's really a big part of this. He's willing to sacrifice people. Like when like you mentioned, Jimmy, in your recap, when they make the force, when he forces them to download all of the people that they've uploaded, a lot of those people's bodies are gone for whatever. And I hope none of them have been.
In fact,
buried.
the great majority of them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're going to die when they're downloaded. I mean, ethically they kind of glide right over that.
Well, the doctor justifies that on the grounds of it's better to die than to be trapped in this living hell of constant, I don't know where I am. I don't know where I am.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, he does bring that up. But
it's, by the way, it's pretty scary the first time that happens to Clara. And he comes in, he breaks into her house and finds her body there on the ground, dead.
Mm-hmm.
And out of the machine is coming her voice, and she's just panicking. I don't know where I am.
Yeah.
And that's actually pretty creepy.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Well, especially since it's coming from a little girl with no back to her head.
Spoonheads. I thought they were Cardassians.
Different kind of spoonhead. They have spoons on the front, not the back.
Yeah.
Right. There is this Doctor Who managed to have this casual, like little bit of horror in it, in when mass amounts of people die sort of in the background of these stories. And it's not treated as upfront as how bad this is, but many people have been killed by this organization, but we kind of glide. That's like, I guess what I was going to say is that we kind of glide past that. We acknowledge a lot of people have been killed, but we're moving on. Just like with when the Cybermen take over, in London and all that sort of stuff. It's like you have this horror element that's there in the background, and it's kind of interesting. It's one of the reasons why my little kids don't watch Doctor Who yet, because I don't think they would handle that well. That they would be particularly sensitive to. But what about all those people? That would be hard for them.
Well, that's something you see a lot, where it's the nameless, faceless people. It's the people that are they're the background cast. The main cast, we got to make sure they stay alive. Claire's got to stay alive, but all these other people, whatever. They're cannon fodder.
Like in that Power of Three episode we watched recently, where it's like a third of the human race dies, and
yes,
and then they bring him back in plausible ways.
Yes, but it's interesting. I mean, it's TV. It's what they do. But it's
they
hard
could do it better.
Yes. At one point, the Doctor, once he's got Clara re-downloaded again for the first time, and he's put her in a room, and he's set some flowers for her and given her some jammy Dodgers, and which is his favorite cookie, and opens up a book she has on the shelf, 101 Places to See, which is kind of his clue that she should come along with him. She should be a new companion. She'd be suitable for that. And there's stuff inside, including a leaf. Isn't there something about
the leaf will become important? Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought. I didn't go back and dig through to find out where the leaf is, but there was some stuff in there that will become important later. One of the things I wanted to mention is just Clara as companion in relationship to the Doctor and how she fits. And they've written her in such a way that she's much less
dependent
and being dragged along by the Doctor. She's kind of stands up to him and kind of knocks him off balance a bit sometimes.
I have in my notes from early in the episode that it's interesting to see the Doctor pursuing a resistant companion, because initially she's not giving him the time of day. He's acting like a madman, and she's writing him off, and she closes the door on him, and he's calling out to her, but she's not paying attention to him. And it is an interesting dynamic we don't normally see. We sometimes see a little bit of hesitance on the part of companions, like when Rose first met the Ninth Doctor, but then they end up becoming very dependent on the Doctor the way Rose did. And Clara doesn't. She, even at the end of the episode, when he gives her the companion invitation, she's like, come back and ask me tomorrow. And why? Because tomorrow I might say yes. And he's like, you understand, I'm just going to push this button and it'll be tomorrow for me. And she's like, yeah, I don't care. Ask me tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she feels a lot like some of the companions from, like, say, what was it, Romana, or not Tegan? Who is the one? Nyssa. I mean, Nyssa has a completely different personality from Clara, but she's got more agency with the Doctor, like more.
Zoe is like that too, but Clara is more like, I'm not going to live on the TARDIS full time, that's new.
Yep.
All of the previous companions have ended up living on the TARDIS full time. And Clara sets boundaries in a way that most companions previously have not. But there have been companions like Zoe and Leela and Romana who had more agency and would stand up to the Doctor more. Zoe would even compete with him at times about who's the better scientist.
Interesting.
It is kind of funny that there's a stereotype, especially classic Who companions, the women being, the screamers. And of course, there's one or two that they'd sit there and, every time, who's the one that she's actually was known because of her.
Mel?
Mel's when she could do the pitch. She could actually scream at pitch.
Yeah. Please scream at F sharp so it'll match the outro music.
Yeah. There's a couple others where that's what they're known for. It's like on a drop of the hat, they would screech. Yeah. It's just like, that's not what most of the women companions in the history of Doctor Who were like. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of them that they were more dependent on the Doctor, but a lot of them aren't.
I think that's in particular something, the dependence on the Doctor is something that, especially emotional dependence, is something that really has been something in New Who.
Yeah.
In Classic Who, they were not emotionally dependent on the Doctor in the same
not
way.
emotionally at least.
Ace certainly was not, and neither was Jo Grant. I mean, she's like, I'm a professional escapologist, and I'm going to do what I want regardless of what you tell me.
Right. Sarah Jane is another one who's very independent. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, it's interesting how the stereotypes arise, but they don't really fit the data.
And going all the way back, Barbara. I mean, she
Yeah.
was not emotionally dependent on the Doctor.
Yeah.
Susan was,
Yeah.
but Susan's his granddaughter, so there's a justifiable in-universe reason for that.
And Vicky kind of was too, I think, right? So far, anyway, as I've seen, I feel like she's not quite Barbara, but she's not quite Susan because she's not his granddaughter, but she seems more dependent on him.
Well, she's an orphan, and he's the only person she's got right now.
Exactly. Yeah. The other thing that was interesting to me that I was talking with Father Cory as we were getting just before we got started was Clara always seems to me like, oh, she's an 11th Doctor companion who kind of held over a little bit with the 12th Doctor, but she's only with the 11th Doctor for half a season, and she's with the 12th Doctor for two
multiple.
whole seasons.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting how, I don't know if that's true for you guys, but for me, she always seems like she's an 11th Doctor companion. She's much more connected with him. And we've talked about that in the past about how the grumpy 12th Doctor shows up and her relationship with him is much different. She's the one who's off balance at that point.
Well, and they start her off as, with again, the Doctor is my boyfriend. That comes up very quickly in this season. But then, when the 12th Doctor comes in, that changes immediately.
Right. Yeah, that becomes much more of a companion and not, emotional relationship in that case. Interesting. So I did want to point out another technology thing that I thought was fun, because whenever you talk about technology in shows like this, especially internet technology, it does become dated. There's at one point where Clara, the hacker with skills, is able to find out where the enemy is. They're in the Shard, which is a famous skyscraper in London, because all the workers there post where they work on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, Google Plus, Foursquare.
Yeah, remember Google Plus?
Yeah,
it's funny. It's funny how quickly things become very set in a time that because of the technology, which is the danger, I guess, of doing tech-based episodes of stories like this. So I thought that was fun.
I thought it was fun. There were a number of fun little things in the dialogue, which you would expect from Stephen Moffat, like when, at the beginning of the episode, when Clara's calling the Doctor on the TARDIS phone, they realize it's different times of day for them.
Yeah.
And he says, she says, am I calling a different time zone? And he's like, you have no idea.
Yeah.
Because he's in 1207.
Yeah.
Then when he shows up, she says, how did you get here? And he says, well, I was just in the neighborhood. How are you talking to me? On my mobile phone. And he gestures back to the TARDIS.
Yeah.
And he says, it's a surprisingly accurate description. Which, of course, it is.
Yes.
I also like a bit where after, she's had a sleep after being re-downloaded and letting her mind reintegrate or whatever. And he's been keeping himself busy during that time. And she's talking to him after she wakes up about, what were you doing while I was asleep? And he says, I did this and that, and I found a disassembled quadricycle in the garage, so I put it back together. And she's like, I don't think you did. And he says to himself, I invented the quadricycle. And I can only imagine that he went into the garage and found a couple of bicycles and said, a disassembled quadricycle. I need to put these together.
Yeah.
There's a fun line at one point where the Doctor's trying to describe to Clara what's going on with the Wi-Fi, and he says, suppose there was something living in the Wi-Fi, harvesting human minds, extracting them. Imagine that. Human souls trapped like flies in the World Wide Web, stuck forever, crying out for help. And she says, isn't that basically Twitter?
Yeah.
In
exactly.
2021, that's even more true. I thought that was a pretty good line. But there was also, he saw that as the evidence for, wait, didn't you not know anything about computers before? And so something was added to her brain when she was uploaded.
Well, and that's one thing that's kind of a recurring theme in this is the idea that people's brains can be hacked, and they even use that phrase, did you hack my brain?
Right.
But that she could tweak people's reactions, like, oh, she wants her second in command to be more paranoid, so she makes him more paranoid and less trusting, and wants higher IQ, and things like that.
If only you could do that. You just push a slider and make yourself smarter, that sort of thing.
I did think the idea of then doing a factory reset was very clever. If you've established you can just manipulate people like using settings on an iPad, then there's going to be a factory reset to undo all those settings tweaks you did.
Right.
What's a little unbelievable, though, is when they reset, so it turns out her second in command is a plumber or something.
Right.
Yeah.
And the third in command guy also doesn't really know why he's there. What's least plausible, and those are fine, but what's least plausible is the lady in charge, Mrs. Kislet, which I assume is meant to resonate with the name Quisling, the famous Norwegian traitor in World War II, or perceived as a traitor in some quarters. But she resets as a little girl. And that would imply she's been in the who doesn't know where her mommy and daddy are. And that would imply that she's been in the service of the great intelligence for so long that she was a little girl when she first entered his service. And that would have been given, she looks like she's in her 60s or 70s. And if she's a little girl, that's like 50 or 60 years.
Yeah.
And I don't know that we had computers at the time that what would she have been working with all this time in his service?
Well, but that goes back to the Snowmen, where Dr. Simeon was affected, possessed, taken control of, or whatever, by the great intelligence in the Victorian era. So, apparently the great intelligence doesn't need a computer.
Right, but but that's what he has these people doing, is uploading people into the Wi-Fi over computers, and that can't have been happening for the last 60 years.
But that's not necessarily the same thing as the factory resetting her, right?
Well, the factory reset, apparently the way it works is it reverts you to what you were right before you went into his service. So the second in command was a plumber who had been summoned to the Shard to work on the plumbing, and then he apparently got co-opted into the great intelligence's service.
Right, but the thing I was thinking was that that those may be two different things. The resetting and all that sort of stuff may be different from the uploading. But in either case, I'm not sure Moffat thought that much of through.
Right. Well, that's my
question.
point. It's an interesting dramatic moment to suddenly have the evil lady be a little girl.
Yeah.
Mentally, but it doesn't really fit, is my point.
That's true.
I also like when the doctor. So at one point, the doctor and Clara have come together, and she's not yet his companion. He invites her into the TARDIS because this is about midway through the episode, because lights are going out all over London, but they're coming on in their neighborhood, and the doctor realizes that the people are being hacked by the Wi-Fi servers, and then a plane with Wi-Fi gets aimed at them. And he's trying to get Clara into the TARDIS, which she is skeptical of because she thinks it's very small and says, what is that, your snogging box? Meaning your kissing box. You go in there to kiss. And he finally gets her in and then jumps the TARDIS onto the plane to try to save everybody. But she has this cup of coffee or tea that she was drinking in that scene before, and all throughout the chaotic plane rescue scene, she's got the cup of tea in her hand. And I like the presence of the cup of tea throughout this dramatic sequence, and she just hangs on to it.
Yes. And at one point, I think she even just kind of, mindlessly takes a sip of it as, the plane's getting ready to crash or something like that.
Right. The idea that it's the plane's Wi-Fi that has to get... If you turn off the Wi-Fi, it'll save the plane. The planes have radios. If a computer's good to take over things, it'll take over things through the radios. But, whatever. It's the technology. So, any other things about this episode? Any other notes you want to bring up, Father Cory?
So just, real quick, you mentioned briefly the Shard, and of course, this is the BBC doing yet another. Look at these great things we have in London. The Shard was a brand new skyscraper at that time. It was actually just opened a year before this episode aired. So, of course, they wanted to feature something that was brand new and have the Doctor riding his anti-grav motorcycle. Triumph, got to feature a British brand up the skyscraper.
That's true. Right. Yeah, I like where he says to the guy who'd been taken over by the Wi-Fi, did you miss the part where I said anti-grav Olympics?
Yeah. Well, and then there's another thing where there's points where they're showing that the Doctor and Clara is being followed through pictures. And of course, this is the concern that people still are worried about today, about being able to be tracked through things like closed circuit TV, through pictures, through videos, upload their videos or pictures and so on. And so that was, an emerging concern at that point that this show came out as well, is how can we be tracked when these pictures, they do post what the GPS location is within the picture itself, right. Within the metadata of the picture. So that's still a concern that people have today, is that, being able to be tracked through stuff like, again, like I said, the security cameras and stuff like that are much more widely available today than they even were in 2013.
And particularly in London, which has often depicted as being unusually security intrusive with security cameras.
Yeah,
right. In fact,
very much so.
Mrs. Kislet actually brings that up at one point. I love what she says. I love how all the cameras in London, or something like that. It's very helpful.
Yep.
Jimmy, any final notes?
We have a little bit of interesting Stephen Moffat world building retconning. We've noticed in previous episodes that the Doctor frequently lands the TARDIS away from where he wants to go. And why is that? Well, this episode we get an explanation, because the Doctor lands the TARDIS on the next day to confront the evil people who don't have a name. And he then takes a motorbike to go confront them. And Clara is like, why didn't you just land the TARDIS closer to them? And he says, because it's the most powerful ship in the universe, and I don't take it into battle because I don't want it falling into the wrong hands.
Right.
So there's a little retcon for us of all those cases where the Doctor could have landed closer and didn't, for no reason other than to generate drama.
Except when he does.
Except when he does, yeah.
Yeah.
I also thought it was cool where the Doctor and Clara have gone to a restaurant on top of some other tall building in London, and a spoonhead that's one of the Wi-Fi servers shows up and impersonates the Doctor to Clara, and that's how she gets re-uploaded and fully integrated. Just add 2 words and you get to change the rules.
Yep.
And then it's a nice reveal where the Doctor then gets on the bike and goes to the Shard and drives up it. I was thinking it was going to be the Gherkin, which is another similar glass skyscraper in London, but it was the Shard this time. And he drives up the side and crashes into Miss Kislet's office, and she's talking to him, and we have a really nice reveal where, despite the tension between the two of them, he's saying, she's saying, like, I can't download her without downloading everybody. Why would I do that? And he says, because I'm going to motivate you in a minute. And she's like, how are you going to do that? And she alludes to him having, I forget exactly how she sets it up, but she says something to the effect of, you don't have the ability to motivate me. And he says, well, actually, I never left that restaurant. And he turns his head around, and he's sent the spoonhead, and he then just uploads her and fully integrates her, so that now the only way to get her out of the living hell is to download everybody, including Clara. But I like that twist, no pun intended, where the Doctor turns his head around and reveals it's not him. He never left the restaurant. This is a spoonhead he's hacked.
Right.
Yep.
That was a good misdirection and reveal. That I didn't see that coming either.
Yeah.
Again, no.
We
pun
we
intended.
should mention they're called spoonheads because the back of their head is concave and metallic.
Yep.
Like the interior surface of a spoon.
Right.
Yep,
Yeah, one of the
exactly.
secondary characters refers to them as that at one point, and yeah, that's how they get their name. All right, I think that should do it for this this discussion of the Bells of St. John. So we'd love to hear your feedback on that. We'll give you the information in a second, but the short form is doctorwho@sqpn.com. But we do have other feedback we wanted to give you today, and this feedback comes from our recent episode 243, Minuet in Hell, featuring the Eighth Doctor, and that was a Big Finish story that Father Cory and I discussed while Jimmy was away. And so our first feedback comes from Mark Romer on Facebook, and he says, I'm presuming Malebolgia is a reference to the Malebolge in Dante's Inferno, the circle that was subdivided into 9 ditches. I can't imagine anyone being able to convince a population that it's a good name for a new state, though.
Indeed, yeah.
Maybe if it was like a desert.
Yeah, Malebolgia is the 8th circle of hell in Dante's Inferno, and roughly translated, Malebolgia means evil ditches.
Evil ditches. I'm just trying to picture like trying to convince people that would be a great name for a state, especially in a place with as in this story, there was a Christian televangelist trying to become governor of this new place. It's a little bit on the nose, revealing too much about yourself, Mr.
We do have some interesting state names based on American Indian languages.
Yep.
Like Kansas and Arkansas are both from the same root. It means like people of the South Wind. And Alabama, if I recall correctly, means I opened the thicket. So there are some interesting names, but Italian is a little close, and people would figure it out and not want that name.
That's interesting. There are a lot of state names that are derived from Native American languages, like Massachusetts, where I'm from, is definitely
Dakota.
Yeah, Dakota, Minnesota, Mississippi. I'm not going to go through them all. Anyway. And then our second...
Virginia is not one of them.
That is definitely not one of them, nor Maryland. So Ted Coville on Facebook says, I'm glad that they consulted the Nicola Bryant Institute for Language and Dialect for this episode. Father Cory and I talked about the American accents that we got to hear. There was some, as
Pretty
one of them...
painful.
Yes, the Foghorn Leghorn version of Southern accent, and some of the others were quite interesting. So thank you both for your feedback. That should do it for now. Before we finish, I want to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create The Secrets of Doctor Who, including Chris D., Adam B., Mark B., Nellie B., and Lynn Z. Not B. You probably thought I was going to say B there. But Lynn Z. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue The Secrets of Doctor Who and all the shows at StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. And, of course, we'd like to thank Victor Lambs, who edits the show for us every week. So that's it from us. What did you think of the Bells of St. John? You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com or the Secrets of Doctor Who Facebook page, or send an email to drwho@sqpn.com. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the second Doctor story, The Enemy of the World.
Yay, I like this one.
Yes, it's a good one.
Until then, Father Cory Stika, thank you for joining me and sharing The Secrets of Doctor Who.
Thank you, Dom.
Jimmy Aiken, thank you as well.
Thanks, Tom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who on StarQuest. And remember, I can't tell the future. I just work there.
Right. This is going to be fun.